G'day and welcome to Mark and Sam After Work. Today I want to do a video about barrel harmonics, barrel vibration timing, barrel tuning, or an overview of the topic of barrel harmonics and barrel tuning, to explain to the novice and explain to people and try and help people both in the industry and in the shooters understand and make the right decisions about what they're doing. I'd qualify things a little bit to start off with, is that I don't use barrel tuners. I haven't found a need. So my conversation comes from not as abreast as probably it could be if I'd gone through and used the product, and I probably will try and test some of them in future. But I haven't found the need with I've seen inaccuracy, and I want to explain a little bit of that sort of stuff, but I wanted to qualify it that way. And largely I wanted to make sure, and I suppose the fundamentals of this is to make clear to people that barrel tuners are not a magic cure. And I think there is people in the marketplace that are selling, or some people buying things hoping to get an easy fix out of things, and they're not an easy fix. They do work in places, but you need to have all your ducks in line before you can use them, so there's a bit involved. And that's why I have to go through and explain this properly. So let me get started on that. First of all, what are we actually talking about? We're talking about vibrations in the barrel that are there because there's an explosion happening. So when you have the solid hunk of steel, that is, we're talking rifles, all firearms do it, but let's just talk rifles. You've got a solid hunk of steel, which is the barrel. Two things happen with the barrel in obvious things when a bullet is fired. One is the powder ignites, the gas explodes, the gas is exploding the whole time as it pushes the bullet out the barrel. So that happens very quickly for our perception in the way of it's happening in milliseconds, but it still is gas, an explosion that builds in pressure and forces that gas expands and it forces the bullet out. At that same time of and every point of the explosion, that's creating shock in the barrel. Now, shock and vibration travels a lot faster than exploding gas. Might be hard to imagine, but it travels a lot faster. What actually has happened when that explosion happens, that initial point of the shock, and as I said, as the whole explosion happened, there's other shocks happening as well. But from that initial explosion, that initial when the primer fires, and that initial explosion is, while that gas is pushing the bullet out, there's actually vibrations that are shooting up and back, 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 as the bullet is actually traveling. Now, whether there's in slower stuff, can be up to 7 times while the bullet's actually traveling. There is micro vibrations and other things which build into what's called harmonics, which are happening even faster than that. Super high rate of vibration actually happening as the bullet's actually going out. And what that means is that potentially that causes the muzzle, the tip, the crown, the actual end of your barrel to be actually oscillating or moving a tiny bit as the bullet's actually traveling out of it. So when we talk timing and tuning, we're actually trying to time that vibration at the end of the barrel to be at exactly the same place, or as smooth as it can be, whatever it ends up being, to end up where the bullet travels as accurately as possible, because there's a very small, can't see it, but there's actually a point where that is moving and potentially is going to make your group larger. So we're timing it in one form or other to make that always be in the same place to get the smallest group for where your projectile's going or where the barrel's pointing every time. So that's the fundamentals of what the harmonics, of what the vibration we're talking about. I mentioned the word harmonics. Harmonics is a way of explaining what we're talking about. It's actually where vibrations are on vibrations. They end up with more of a vibration than the initial ones because they've amplified. That can be sound vibrations, that can be other things. It's what makes a bell ring. It gets one whack, it turns into a ring. That ringing is a harmonic of terms. And that's what we're talking about, trying to tune in some fashions. Whether we're changing the pitch of it or we're moving it to different places, what we're talking about. So that's the timing side of things. Now, to get into the time, we're trying to line up that bullet to come out where the vibration is at the same or the smoothest place. And we do that by test that by shooting groups and finding what we're doing. Now I'll get into what we're going to do, but that's what we actually do when we're tuning, is we're looking for the smallest group. And not just the smallest group in whatever we're doing to get it. We're doing a test at this position, a test at this position, a test at this position. We end up with a group of groups that are small is the right place to be. So we're trying to find a curve, large groups, small groups, large groups. In through there, if there's a few patches in through there, that's when we start working on it in a crude way of a summation of that. Okay, so that's what we're doing. So what do we do to do that tuning? Well, there's two basic ways to do it. One is to work on this end of the rifle. One way is to work on the load. The other way is to work on this end of the rifle. Now, this is what I'm talking about largely, but let's quickly go through this. Both with your powder load, which varies the speed of the bullet. So that means that the bullet travels at different speeds. And by doing that, this vibration is, for this point of the conversation, a constant thing. We vary the speed to the point where that lines up in the smoothest spot where it lines up. So that's done by changing the speeds. There's another way to do it, is to actually change the seating depth of the bullet. So this is actually talking about, there's other things going on, but this part of the conversation is simply talking about by changing the seating depth, where in way faster than microseconds, we're down to nanoseconds or whatever the correct term down there, but is by changing that seating depth, we're changing the timing of when the bullet starts to fire to when it actually starts to move properly in the barrel, by the fact there's more jump, so the bullet speed changes. Essentially, there's pressure curves that change, there's all sorts of other things that change, but what we're talking about doing is we're using seating depth to do the same thing, to time it to get to this best spot to release in the barrel. So that's one way of doing it. And I suppose I would touch right at this moment, just before we go to the other end, all this is the fact that everything else is completely sorted out. So that means that this is not a off-the-shelf hunting rifle that you just shoot in groups to try and get the best, although you do load developments to a degree, and that is talking about the finding nodes for timing the bullet in some fashions, but there's another thing going on. You must always keep in mind that, especially even in this sort of rifle, which is a very well set up tactical rifle with a really nice bipod and all that sort of stuff on it, it's still, there's other things going. When that goes bang, even though the bullet is, or while the bullet is traveling out, the rifle starts moving. So that is part of what load development is messing with. So your shooter form, your shooter platform, all that sort of stuff needs to be really good. Largely where this timing and testing, whichever way you're doing the tuning of your load, was done is in a bench rest situation where you have very well controlled forend on the rifle, was set up with slides and guides and rubbing blocks and that sort of stuff, very well controlled, and a big heavy bag down the back, heavy rifle, heavy barrel, everything done to where it is super concise, and it means that you have very little shooter influence on it. There's other things involved with that, but really that means that the rifle performs perfectly and we're just tuning the barrel. So then the barrel is doing its own thing. So whether it's the load we're tuning to the barrel or the barrel we're tuning to the load, that's where we're talking about. So that's one of the bits to be careful with, because if you haven't got everything else dialed in, messing with either one of these things to any large degree is not going to get you the real results, because there's other things going on. So back onto it. Now we're into tuning the barrel at this end. A couple of ways to do it. I suppose I'll touch on, I should stop and say that there's a couple of ways of also controlling this. You can be dampening this vibration to make it less or more, make it less, or you can tune to it. So the quick one in the middle of that is a piece like this here, which is a little, looks like a doinker. It's a rubber, it's a limb saver barrel dampener, vibration dampener, and it's just a piece of rubber, flexible piece of rubber that you slide on a barrel. A little more for I'll just grab a rifle that fits the equation. A little more for this sort of thing, little sporter barrel, that sort of stuff. It'll slide on the end, and you'll put it to wherever on here, move it backwards and forwards, and just find a place where it groups better. So little stuff with what we're talking about, that's dampening. I'll put this one down again. That's dampening in what you're doing, and there's other forms of dampeners as well, and that's where the structured barrel, and there's other composite filled tubular barrels, there's other things that have done that. That's about dampening the vibration. Different conversation, has some logics to it. There's other things going on, but that's a different side of things. We're talking about tuning. So let's get on to the two main forms of tuning. In a centerfire sort of thing, there is this sort of thing. Now, I haven't got the brand of it. It's a very good tuner. This is a little bit of a dampener and a tuner. There's also solid steel ones, which are just don't have any dampening. They're just steel. And what they work like is you have to machine your barrel, and they can work with a muzzle brake or without, because I suppose in fitting them, you're very simply, it's a gunsmith job, but you're machining down the end of the barrel to make it smaller, putting a very fine thread. Inside here is a very fine thread on there. This goes on, screws onto there, largely would sit about there on the barrel. It has a little lock clamp, so once you've set it, you can lock it up. But that sits on there, and what that actually does, I'll quickly explain. This is a dampener as well, because it has a little sort of harmonic balancer in it as well to help absorb it. But the main thing we're talking about when we're tuning is that this actually positions the weight in fractionally different places at the end of the barrel. Now, the logic of that is that by changing the balance, exactly where that weight is at the end of the barrel, is it changes the timing of that vibration. It actually affects it. Or it changes exactly how it positions it. So where the barrel was doing this at the end of the muzzle, it does this. It's more just straight up and down. Or it just reduces the size of the little tiny vibration. Now, I say or and look a bit doubtful because we really can't tell you exactly what it does. It is result-based logic that we're running with. What that means is we haven't scientifically completely analysed exactly what's going on at any place here. It's too fast, and we don't exactly know whether we've got the ability or we haven't. What we really are doing is it's on the results. Someone made something like this, screwed it on the barrel, had the idea many years ago. These have been used for a long while. Many years ago, put it on there and found that by positioning things, they got different groups. So everything else was sorted out in their rifle, and by doing that, they found they got different groups. So that's where the logic comes from. Exactly, precisely what's happening is different on some, but something you have to go through and test to figure out what happens to yours. And as said, without everything else being perfectly in line, you only can go by the results. It's not always going to work, but really does work. There's some world-class shooters, and there's lots of people who do use these. There's also lots of people that have them on the rifle and have not really set them up properly also, but it is a real thing. It does really work. So that's centerfire. And that can work with muzzle brakes or not muzzle brakes. Much more likely to be set up on a proper bench rest rifle where everything's super solid, super well done, and they really do see results in those places. But there's also people who'll simply do it with their load. There's also people who do it with other fundamentals as well. So it isn't an absolute need, but it can work in those places. So that's the barrel tuner on that level. The other barrel tuner I have here is a Rimfire barrel tuner. This works in a different concept. It suits rimfires, and it may be amazing to think, but yes, you can get a barrel of this sort of gauge that actually operates in a 22, so 22 rimfire, subsonic ammo, that the barrel tuner makes real differences to. It's hard to imagine that little barrel is actually wriggling around, but it is probably the most common place that you will really see a barrel tuner. Now this works slightly differently. The way this one works, it has a clamp in here, but it's just smooth. You machine this piece out in here to slip onto the end of the barrel. It slides on the end of the barrel, and then you change the length of this thing. It has a couple of things. It has a fine adjustment, which is a little lock up here with a thread that this screws in and out, and then you lock to that place. It also has large adjustment. There's other pieces here that you get them where they can be up to this long and down to just this long. And you fine tune it to suit your barrel and your load. Well, with a 22 rimfire, you suit the ammunition, and largely they have some set distances at, I think it's the 3rd and the 5th and the 7th, but they're actually talking about, and my presumption is, because I haven't studied it fully, is that the vibration versus the slow bullet has one spot where it's nice, another spot where it's nice, and another spot where it's nice in a very simple thing. So use that as a guide to put it on, then you do your testing, you do shooting to do that. The logic of this one is that by changing the length of the barrel is you change the length of how far that vibration goes. So if it's only going here, it's on this time. If it goes there, it's this time. If it's on there, it's that time. So you're actually changing the timing point by changing the length the vibration goes to control your barrel. But the other detail that's really important to understand with this sort of, with the rimfire tuning, is to set them up. As I said, you need pristine, everything needs to be working perfectly. Everything else is done. It's follow through, whatever it is you're shooting, it's working perfectly to the level where the guys who really do this and do this properly set it up only indoors is the place to actually set it up and start it off. I know a particular mob that have cetainers, all 50 meters of cetainers. So they have got a little range in there specifically designed to work out and make sure everything's working properly with the rifle, but to set up the tuner side of things. Because you need to test very, very, very thoroughly to really see what's actually standing. You can't have wind pushing it around. Something like a rimfire, it's slowed down, wind affects it a lot, so you then are tuning to suit that. And there's stories I know about different things of how they set it up and looking at their groups and working different groups for different wind, working different timing positions slightly for different temperature barrels and different days and that sort of stuff. So there's a lot of research you can go into it. It really does work, but it is in a very specific place they're actually using it. Okay, so I think that's the basics of what I wanted to say about barrel tuning, about barrel timing, harmonics and that sort of stuff. It is really involved and it can work in places and really is something, but it is also something to be very careful of. It's not a magic cure. I would say I have a different take to it, which is an important thing to understand for two reasons. One means that my information is driven from someone who hasn't used this. So I need to qualify that. I understand it, understand where it's used, but I don't use it. Why don't I use it? Well, I don't use it because I haven't found the need. That's the simple answer I've got to go with it. I've found ridiculous groups and things. Could it maybe a little better? Listen, it's possible, and I wouldn't dispute that it is possible. My logic's a little different. I use a barrel dampening system, which is called the nut behind the butt. I attach my body very thoroughly with preload, with a rifle set up to do that, and my feeling is that because of the way I'm much more attached to the rifle is I'm doing a certain amount of barrel dampening because of that. Once again, a result-based thing. I've seen ridiculously small groups. I've found that if I shoot a rifle in the right fashion, the rifle changes in its dynamics, it changes its groups better. I do a lot of setting up the rifle to make everything work. And as said, largely the barrel tuning systems are in a bench rest form, which is almost or very close to a free form of shooting, where the rifle is moving by itself, it's not attaching to the human so much, so it's in that same sense more likely to have a bit more of the ringing bell thing going on because it isn't attaching to the human so much, but it's then doing everything very, very accurately, which is the reason for doing it that way. Whereas my form is using the human, which means I'm attaching more dampening system to it, this big squishy thing here, the body, I'm attaching to the rifle and absorbing the vibration, but then the body has to do everything right. So in a bench rest form, when that trigger is pulled and that rifle comes back pretty much by itself, everything is controlled except for the harmonics. So that's where the tuner really has, you can really see a win side of things in that world. Me in my form, tactical shooting, prone tactical shooting, I'm attaching the human, so I feel at least that I'm doing a lot more controlling of the dampening through the body. But the human part, even though we've got good bags and we've got grounded bipods and all the things I do and study in here, sorry Scope, all the things I do in here and study in here to try and make it work well, the human still is a big driving factor in your accuracy side of things. So there's a yin and a yang. You can, go either way. I'm not saying either way is better, but I'm sort of explaining what I've found. And I suppose ultimately that's the other thing. With all this stuff, as good as it is, there are still people who don't use it that still compete in the same level. So there is other things, like I said, you can time a barrel by timing things down this end of the stuff. Maybe ultimately it should all be in play, and maybe either one of those concepts could be correct. Main point of my video was to just let people know these are a real thing, that they've been around for a fair while and really do work, but not in all places. Someone who's looking to get a barrel tuner in whatever form to put on their new Tikka TX3 or on their Savage, or it's not a brand thing, on any, whatever rifle it is, Remington 7 or whatever it is, they've just got a hunting rifle or a decent little level tactical rifle, chassis rifle, whatever it is, and they're just putting on this on because they can't make it shoot properly. No, it's largely not going to be improvement. Doesn't mean it's not a cool thing, doesn't mean it couldn't end up being an improvement, but until everything else is in line, and I suppose I would do that on a group thing. If you've got a 1.5 inch group and you're trying to fix that with a barrel tuner, possible, but it's probably not, you're not in the right place. It's when you're in a 3/4 inch group and you're trying to get down lower than that, or in a 1/2 inch group and you're going to try and get down lower than that. That's where this is more likely to be to actually gain your stuff. Guys who are trying to tune a barrel and they haven't sorted out everything else, listen, it might have a cool factor for you, but it's unlikely to be a win. And there certainly are people that have worn stuff out trying to make sense of things. And there certainly is a whole crowd that will have them on there because the last guy that won the competition had them, so I've got it too. And okay, that's fair enough. Are they using it properly? Well, that's another thing. So that's it. That's what I want to say. Good system, work well. The barrel tuning is a real thing. Got to make sure it suits you before you go down that road. But keep in mind, I'm a guy who doesn't use them, so maybe there's an angle I'm coming from. Not really, just trying to share. Anyway, guys, that's it. That's what I want to share with you. Hope that's some help. Thanks for checking in on us, and we'll catch you next time.